All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Tycho Talks. I've got Callum with us again.
Hey.
I'm sure everybody remembers from a few episodes ago, so it's exciting to have you back on. Whenever you come on, you always add a lot of value, and I actually thoroughly enjoy the conversation. So you're definitely going to be seeing a lot more of him, fingers crossed. But look, what we're going to talk about in today's episode is fear. So we're going to go through types of fear, how the brain responds to fear, and then we'll wrap up with how fear is actually a massive hindrance to people reaching their full potential.
Right.
And I just thought this would be an interesting topic. Now, we're going to try and smash it out in 50 minutes. 50 minutes is not going to be enough for us to cover everything, so we're going to be quite general. So let's go into types of fear. Now, we've got innate fears, which are obviously biological. I don't know if you want to touch on them, but they're things as like fear of height.
Mm-hmm. Fear of like dangerous animals,
Yep.
Social outcasting even. As a kid, you need that support, people
Yep.
to raise you. I think it's all babies, because a lot of phobias are based on experience. So if there's like a dog that attacks you, you might be afraid of dogs. But all babies are innately afraid of, I think it's either spiders and falling or loud noises and falling.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's an
more of a
innate one.
biological response.
Right.
And then the next one is learnt fears, which is, as you mentioned, it's something that's conditioned from a young age, where you have a negative experience with a dog or a teddy bear or something, and then you obviously form that negative relationship with whatever it is. So they're learnt fears, and then we've got social fears, which I really want to hone in on, because I think these are fears that a lot of people have, that if they could just combat them in a healthy way, they'd actually have a better life.
Definitely.
You'd have a better life if
Definitely
you
you
weren't walking around with social anxiety. And I used to have, social anxiety, so I'm talking from experience when it comes with this. But yeah, it's fear of public speaking, fear of rejection, avoiding opportunities because your brain's telling you, well, what if they say no? What if they don't like you? What if this, that? And then we've got fear of the unknown, which is fair enough. I mean,
Yeah, it's a big one.
that's a big one, and it's fair. I think that's quite reasonable.
Yep.
That a lot of people are worried about the future, what the future holds, and
Definitely.
the fact that it's not in their control. Anything that's not in our control strikes that feeling of anxiety, if that makes sense.
100%. That's something we can touch on a lot more later as well.
Sure. And then the last one I want to touch on as well is performance-related fears. So this is a big one: fear of failure, fear of success even, and how these fears impact people on a day-to-day basis, and how it actually stops people from taking that risk to better their career or better their business. So I guess out of these, they're all just as important as each other, but what would you say your top two, for example?
Top two in terms of what is best to combat, what would be good.
What is best to really focus on in this episode and in combat?
So innate fears, I think we can touch on them a little bit. We already did, but that's a pretty natural and biological thing. They're there to help you. We don't need to talk about that too much.
Yeah.
I think learned fears is important as well, because you could potentially learn to be afraid of maybe connecting with someone. If you've had a lot of rejection, you could maybe associate that and you wouldn't want to talk with people. That relates to social cues as well. So social fears, I think definitely we'll touch on. I agree, that's probably the biggest one. And then fear of the unknown as well. I think those two tie into each other a lot, and they are similar, but I think those two are the ones that will really hold you back from succeeding.
Absolutely.
So we'll focus on those.
Yeah. I think fear of the unknown is interesting because now I have a faith. So maybe why I don't resonate with that one too much is because I understand that there's an afterlife and, God has a plan for us, etc. And so I don't fear the unknown long term because I am stable and safe in my belief system as a Christian. So maybe that's why I don't fear the unknown. Maybe I can't speak for someone else who doesn't see that path where there's an afterlife and, heaven and all that. Maybe they fear the unknown because there's no safe haven for them, as in they're like, well, what happens after this?
They don't have an answer.
They don't have an answer. And so I get why that could be a fear. I think for me, social and performance-related fears are big. When it comes to learnt fears, parenting is going to be everything with these learnt fears.
Yep.
Because if you are a parent who is conscious of fear and how the brain works, you can combat this in your kid's behavior at an early age. You can,
That's so true.
You can utilize different tools to help your children at an early age. Not be afraid at approaching strangers, or not be afraid at approaching, whatever it is, dogs, whatever. Like there are things that you can do to help calm that and settle that as much as possible. So I think that's actually probably 90% got to do with how you parent.
Definitely. And just the overall environment that you're raised in. Association and that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, social fears. Have you ever, now you're really outgoing, but have you ever had an experience where you feared, public speaking or fear of rejection, and therefore you've avoided speaking to a certain person?
100% I have.
Walk us through that process. What's your mind telling you in that moment?
100% I have. Because I think the thing is, as you said, I'm very outgoing. So I don't necessarily struggle to talk with people overall. But that doesn't mean that certain people I might not be afraid of, or maybe to go deep with it, certain topics, or have a certain goal in mind that I wouldn't want to go for. Because it's one thing to maybe be able to talk to everyone, but it's another thing, as you said, to ask them out or to talk about a business or whatever it is, right? You can kind of keep surface level with it, and that might not be that scary. But then if you want to tell them you love them or something, you can be like, whoa, that's a bit crazy, right?
Actually, I so resonate with that. That's actually me as well. But I didn't realize that was me until you just said that. So keep going.
Yeah, so I've definitely done that. And it does go back to, I guess, both social fears and fear of the unknown. Where if you maybe don't have a lot of experience with it, or if obviously you don't know how they're going to respond. You don't know if they will like you back, if they want to do business with you or want to give you a job or whatever the case is. So because of that, I think your brain can naturally try to justify and avoid it. So you can say, I'll ask them later, now's not the right time. I'll keep talking about this thing. Or no, they're in a bad mood, I don't want to do it now. And that can always be the case. Always there can be something in the way that'll make you project it into the future. And I think that's a big part of fear as well, is that procrastination. You're afraid to do it now, you'll always keep projecting it, coming up with excuses, not going for it all.
Just to add on to that, and I know we're going to be talking about how to combat this stuff, but we might as well since we're on this. So you mentioned that procrastination is a big part of fear, where you kind of put it off. Now, I know we're going to talk about this, but how you combat fear is action, right? Now, you're going to know who this chick is. I forgot her name. I think it's Mel.
SM.
Mel Robbins.
Oh, Mel Robbins, yep. I was going to touch on this later,
Yeah. So we'll come back to her.
Yep.
But she talks about this 5-second rule, where if you're in a situation where you see someone who you might want to ask out, or you want to approach someone for a job interview or whatever it is, just have a 5-second rule where you just count down, and before you hit that 5 seconds, you just go do it.
Yep.
Because, as you mentioned, the procrastination is what actually prevents you from taking that chance and that opportunity.
Yep.
Right? It's the same thing within the morning, where if I'm trying to get up and I'm really, really tired, 5 seconds, count down to 5, or count up to 5, whatever it is.
Down. If you count up, you can keep going, because then you go, oh no, I'll go to 10, I'll go to whatever.
Okay. So count down. I didn't know that. I'm sure she mentioned it, but it would have slipped my mind.
Yep.
So I think that's an important thing as well. I just wanted to bring that up because we talked about procrastination. And so a way to combat that is you've got to take action, immediate action.
Right.
And then you go through it, and then you realize, hey, it wasn't that bad.
Yes, always. Literally every time.
Every time, right? What about performance-related fears? Because I know that for me, this is a big one. I personally haven't understood. I might have to go speak with someone, but I haven't really understood how this is holding me back. It's not that I have fear of failure, but I do. But maybe it's fear of success as well. Like I don't know the difference, to be honest, in my head.
Yep.
Because I always tell myself that, I don't, everyone fears failure. Like I always, long term, if I get to the end of my life and I haven't succeeded at what I wanted to succeed at, I fear that. But then on a day-to-day basis, I don't fear failure.
Yep.
I will take risk. But maybe on a day-to-day basis, I fear success. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
So on a day-to-day basis, I fear success, and it's like there's something holding me back.
Okay.
But long-term, I fear failure.
Yep.
And I think that's where, oh man, I gotta go see a therapist now. I'm like, oh no. But I think it's important to talk about this because it holds a lot of people back.
It does.
Fear of failure. is a good thing because you're there's a sense of urgency. You don't want to fail,
Right.
but it also can be a bad thing because it comes with anxiety, right? But do you want to touch on that for a bit?
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the fear of failure, it is a good thing, right? Because for one, the sense of urgency, and it also can make you think about it. So you think, oh, I shouldn't maybe approach this in this way because that could go wrong. You can actually look at the details and try to critically think about how you're able to best approach it and succeed in that way. But I guess you're right. I do think that everyone has a fear of failure because why wouldn't you? No one wants to fail. Maybe their identity is tied up with failure and that's why they keep doing it, but you don't consciously want to. You don't set out to be like, yeah, I don't want things to go right, right? But with success, huge one. I think most people have a fear of success, with or without knowing it.
Can you actually explain what you think fear of success is? Like, what is your
I definitely
perception of that? Because I'm still trying to, it's just not clicking in my head for some reason. Like, how do you fear success? But then I also know that I'm sure that I do.
Yep.
Because I want it so bad.
Yep.
That maybe there's resistance there and therefore part of me fears it.
Okay.
I want to hear your perspective on fear of success.
So it really ties into the two main fears that we wanted to touch on as well, which was the fear of the unknown and the fear of, and social fears as well. So I think the thing with those two is naturally your brain will fear what's unknown. So we just touched on that. And the reason for that is because our brain is very logical. It's severely a survival mechanism, right? It just gets us from A to B. We don't get attacked. We're able to have kids and do whatever we want to accomplish. Now, the brain loves patterns and it loves habits. So that's the reason we fall into the same routine, because it's comfortable.
Yeah.
The brain hates things that aren't comfortable and predictable. Ultimately, that's there to help you. If you do something new, you're not going to be able to predict and look at all the factors, and therefore you can't ensure safety. Now, nowadays, most of the time, you're not going to be unsafe. We are in a fairly safe world. The average person, in most cases, is safe. But that doesn't mean that the mechanism of the brain isn't going to still look for things that are dangerous, because that's what it's there for. Constantly, we're going to be scanning for predators and for this type of stuff, because the brain hasn't actually evolved that much. Society has. We've come so far with technology and all this. From an evolutionary standpoint, the systems of the brain are very similar to how they were when we first were coming into being. So because of that, we fear success because it's something unfamiliar and it's something that we can't predict. So we can't be sure that it's actually supposed to be safe. So that's why people stay in the same situation that they're in now. Even if it's uncomfortable, it's unproductive, it's dysfunctional, it can even be harmful to them, either physically or emotionally, whether it's like an abusive situation or maybe just a certain level of money or happiness or whatever. They don't want to break out of that because it's not something that they're able to land with. They don't actually feel safe with it. And that also can come from social fears as well. People will often tear down people who are successful. They'll think that they're cheating to get there, or they're a bad person, or there's that stigma around money. Very rich people maybe are bad or have cheated the system, something like that. So you don't want to actually make people, you don't want to stand out. You don't want to have a reason for people to attack you. Because going back to that, as I was saying, with the brain being very similar, in the day we needed people to survive. And we still do, obviously to an extent. But if you were kicked out of the tribe, you would die. You couldn't fight against all the lions and stuff. So you also want to stay at the level of the people around you.
See, I agree with you. I don't think that is applicable for me.
To you, yep.
To me. But I agree with you. I agree that that's a thing.
Yep.
But it's weird because you mentioned something about fear of success where something about the unknown. What did you say about that?
It's unpredictable, so it's unsafe.
Yeah, it's unpredictable.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where my issue is. Look, this is not a therapy session, by the way. Just thoughts are going. I'm just.
You can pay me afterwards.
Yeah, I'll pay you after. But maybe that's what it is. Like the thought of maybe because I'm not in control and because I don't have it yet. Maybe that's what potentially gives me that anxious feeling.
Yep.
But I don't fear what people might think of me if I hit success or how they might speak
I know
of
that,
me,
yeah.
if I reach success. So it's interesting. But yeah, no, how do you think, before we move on to how fear impacts the brain, how do you think we can combat fear of failure, fear of success, that sort of thing?
I think there's a couple ways.
Fear of failing at like a task.
Yep.
If you think about it, so relevant to the everyday person.
Yep.
We all go to work, we all have businesses, we all have school, we all have tests, we've all got university. We're always on a consistent basis being given opportunities or tasks that we can either succeed at or fail at. And so we're always going to be in this boat, everybody. Even in everything, like competitive sport, everything. Your day-to-day consists of two options. You're going to succeed at this task or you're going to fail at this task.
Definitely.
And if a lot of people can find a way to combat that, their life is going to be a lot less stressful, less anxiety.
Yep.
They're going to have a more fulfilled life. So what are your thoughts on combating that?
Man, I've got so many. So I think there's a couple of different ways too. One is an internal thing. So actually creating an identity that you are someone successful, because that'll create you being comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Right? So people who always fear all the time, that's because they actually see them. And, failure is a part of everything. Even if you're the most successful guy, you'll fail a lot, of course.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But people who fail all the time is a consistent thing. No matter what they do, it never seems to go right. That's because they see themselves as a failure.
That's true. That's true.
100%
And I think that's why I said before, I don't, the whole fear of success or fear of how people see me,
Yep.
that doesn't impact me because my identity is one way.
Yep.
My identity is, I'm a successful person. You even have, it's on, I always point to my affirmation mirror, but it's there.
Yeah.
And it's been there for years. Like I am successful. So that's for my identity. And so yes, do I fail at things all the time? But it's not part of my identity. It's just a stepping stone to that success that I'm going to reach.
Exactly.
So that's a really important point. And that is actually a really practical way to combat it. Change your identity.
Yes.
And then there are different tools to help you do that. But that's your cue. That's your first step.
Yeah.
Actually understand what is your identity currently. Is it fear-based or is it success-based? And start changing it to be like, no, I succeed at everything I put my mind to.
Yep.
Keep going.
That's great. And the ways to do that, as you said, affirmation, self-talk, be around successful people, read good, successful content, all that kind of thing. So I think that's one way. The other is, and it really also goes back to what you were saying about how to prepare your kids to have a good relationship with fear. And it's the idea of exposure therapy. Yep. So if you slowly, you don't have to completely go from living on the street to walking into a huge mansion and being like, I'm going to live here. But if you just have tiny little improvements in your life, it's not so far out of your identity and comfort that you'll reject it. So you can slowly integrate yourself with that as a way to make it a part of who you are, make sure you're comfortable with it, and it's those stepping stones to get up there. So I think that's one. Another is, what was I going to say? What did you just touch on before I started talking?
We'll have to pause it. No, I'm joking. Pause it, rewind. No, that's all right. Well, have a think, but I'll add on to what you said about parenting. I think parenting is one of the greatest social experiments. Like children, and I don't mean this in a
I remember exactly what I was going to say now.
Do you? Do you want to say that first?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That was perfect. The perfect word you used for it.
Good.
So the other thing.
I got you.
Was, so as you said, stepping stones, an experiment, right?
Yeah.
So if you actually change your perspective around failure, and you don't see it as an end-all be-all, but you see it as a way to learn and to get better.
Yeah.
And when you have that perspective, I don't see failure as bad. I see it as feedback. So you're able to be like, oh, this didn't work. Why? Let me look at it. Let me see what I can change, why that went wrong. Even if there was nothing different you could do, maybe you can change your own resilience, or you now know that you're more prepared for better things down the track, even harder obstacles.
Yeah,
that was the other point.
That's so powerful. And two of those things that you just mentioned, because I'm not a parent yet, so I can't say that I can relate to all three, but two of those things that you mentioned is something that I practice all the time. And I practice at a really early age where I saw failure as a good thing. So once again, the first thing was changing your identity.
Yep.
You got to, it's going to take time to work on that, but just start working it and you'll see. The second one is your relationship with failure and how you perceive it. Are you perceiving it as a negative or are you perceiving it as a positive? Do I see failure when I fail at something? Am I like, oh, I'm a loser? Or am I like, holy crap, this has just unlocked something for me to improve on and now I'm a step closer. Failure is a step closer to where I'm going. So they're actually really really powerful, those two things that you mentioned on how to combat it.
Yep.
And I think that if you were to practice that on a daily basis, where if I fail at something, it's normal for me to kind of be down on myself, be like, far out, like this is really tough. But I really quickly get myself out of that and I go, this is a stepping stone. Like I'm a step closer. I actually needed that to understand how to combat level 2. You know I'll give you an example. You know when you're playing a video game, I used to play Tarzan on PlayStation 2, it was the best game. And you'd get to a certain level and you couldn't beat the level. Mm-hmm. But all your experience prior, so every time you did level 5, you would learn something. You understand when the enemy comes. You understand that Tarzan gets really, there's a certain point where he can't fight the enemy from that angle.
Yep.
And so you start to learn things from all the experience you have up until level 5, and even the failure during level 5 that help you eventually beat the level and go on to level 6.
Facts,
so I see it in a really similar way, where every time you fail at something, if you perceive that in a positive way, where you're just equipped, like you're preparing yourself for the next level.
Yep.
You're teaching yourself that this is what you need, this is the resilience you need, these are the skills that you need to be able to get to the next level. That's a really positive relationship you can have with fear of failure.
I love that. And in that way, you can't lose as well. You've either won and you've gotten further, or you've grown.
Learned, yeah, you've learned, you've grown.
Definitely.
100%. That is the last time I say 100% in that episode. I'm maxing it to maybe 2 or 3 an episode.
All right. We'll talk about that in the next session.
Do you remember my first episode where I was telling you I said it like 1,000 times? So that's why, but that's what I really like about this. It's reflection, improvement, execution. So, all right, so let's talk about how fear impacts the brain. And I want you to talk about, the nitty gritty of this in a second. Okay. But I want to tell you a story about this patient, and she goes by SM. And it's a woman who, I don't know if there was damage to a certain part of her brain, where she basically never experienced fear. Now, I do want to touch on fear, and as I was mentioning to you before we started filming, is fear is not a negative thing.
Yep.
And I know you're going to touch on this, but we need fear to be able to survive. We need fear to be able to tell us when to not cross the road if there are cars coming, when to not go with a stranger who is giving off really weird vibes. Mm-hmm. Fear is actually a positive thing. So when you understand that fear is actually helping you survive and helping you extend your life, right? You understand that it's normal, but it's really how you respond to fear and how you differentiate between, fear that's helping endangering you,
right?
And then fear that's actually just things that you can combat, like little things on a day-to-day basis that sometimes the brain confuses. But I want to talk about this patient because I find this really interesting, this story, where she didn't have that response to fear, and so she would put herself in situations that...
Yeah, she had damage to the amygdala, it said.
Damage to the amygdala, perfect. So was caused by another rare condition, and she would basically be put in situations that to a normal human, you would be fearful. So for example, if I've got you at gunpoint, you are most likely going to be fearful and you know that your life is in danger.
Yep.
And so you then go into that response,
the fight or flight.
And you're like, what do I do? And most times, if I got a gun to your head, you're probably screwed anyway.
Yeah,
but you never know, bro. You never know. You got a lot of skills, so
definitely.
You never know. But she would be in a situation like that, and she said she didn't feel fear during those life-threatening situations.
Crazy.
So she was also aware that her inability to react was not normal. And so there were a couple of times where she actually, I think there was one time where someone kidnapped her, and she went with the kidnapper because she thought that she was just getting a ride with this guy, like hitchhiking. And so she went with him. I'm pretty sure he sexually assaulted her. And then a couple of days later, she did the same thing because her brain is not telling her, hey, red flag, red flag, red flag. You're in danger.
Yeah.
And so I guess where the brain, plays a role in fear and how fear impacts the brain, it's important, where I'm trying to get to with this, is important that we do have fear.
Yes, it definitely is.
It's not a bad thing, right? So do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with all that. So I think fear definitely is actually a really important part because exactly as you said, you don't want to go off with an abuser or not be afraid at gunpoint, or if you see a croc, you're like, I'll go for a swim with it, whatever the case is. So fear is there to actually protect you. And it really also goes back to what I was saying about how our brain hasn't evolved that much. So the amygdala, as touched on here, is the part of the brain a lot primarily involved with the fear response and a lot of those primal urges. And that part of the brain is the same. It's one of the earliest mind parts that was evolved. So it is still in full effect now. Even though we're not in that many of fearful situations, when we are in ones that could be physically endangering, you want to have fear. That's natural, it's normal, because you want to be able to get out of there. But the brain's going to find fear in a lot of situations, even if they aren't harming you.
So can I just, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt your flow. This is the point that I was trying to make, which is so powerful. We cannot demonize fear, but we have to be smart enough to understand the difference between, as we mentioned before, fear that is healthy and is innate, and that is actually helping us with our survival and longevity of life, versus fear that's actually doing the opposite, that's not endangering us. So my fear, my social anxiety and fear of going and speaking to someone that I might want to approach, that's not a danger to me. But lack of doing that, stopping myself from doing that, is a danger to me. Because it's a lack of opportunity. I'm not, pursuing something that I want to pursue. And so I find that really interesting, actually. One thing is healthy fear that helps us long term. The other thing is unhealthy fear that actually is a detriment to us long term.
Right.
Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But yeah, keep going.
It does. I love that so much. And you're right. And it also goes back to how you were raised, or those learned fears as well. So the mind isn't able to actually tell, or the body isn't able to tell the difference between a thought and reality. So that's why if you're having these anxious thoughts and you are afraid of maybe approaching someone, something random like that, you still have the same fear response, that anxiety, because your brain doesn't know the difference between I'm in danger and there's a pretty girl or there's a guy I'm scared to talk to, whatever. So, and one can be very detrimental, as you said. And I think both detrimental in your external results. So something like maybe you don't ask for a raise or you don't marry someone you want. That obviously is a detriment to your potential that you could have achieved. But it also actually is a detriment physically as well. Because if you're in a constant state of fear, that's unhealthy. It'll affect your sleep. It'll affect your health. Memory. I think it makes, memory as well. Your ability to actually think critically, so to navigate situations in a good way, recall information that could be useful, all that kind of thing. So that's why you have to combat it. That's why it's important to learn how to get over that fear, or at least to be able to do it anyway and to learn how to minimize it.
Absolutely. And I want to add on to that because you mentioned something really important, and I have known this for a while, and I'll tell you how I combat fear. But also I listened to a podcast, a friend of mine recommended this, and she's so cool. And she recommended this podcast to me, and I would listen to it. And this lady talks about how, as you mentioned, the brain actually does not know the difference between fear and excitement. If you're on a roller coaster, you could have one person in a line, and this is not my words, by the way. This is the lady that I listened to on the podcast words, okay? But she said that you could be in line waiting to go on a roller coaster, and you've got someone who's super excited and like, I can't wait. And you could have someone who's, holy crap, who's making me do this? Like, they've roped me into this, and they're both, one's excited and one's really, really nervous and crapping their pants, but they're both experiencing the same physiological response. Right? And this is where it gets really interesting, because when you understand that, you can combat it. So what I started to do a while ago is, when I understood this concept that the brain does not know if you're excited or if you are nervous. If I'm about to speak on stage in public, or I'm about to approach someone, and I start getting that feeling where my stomach starts turning, start to sweat a bit, I actually just tell myself that I'm excited. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Tell your brain that you're excited. And that is, it might sound cuckoo to a lot of people, but you do have to manipulate your brain sometimes. And so that is a really powerful way to combat fear. You tell your brain, hey, I'm actually not scared of this. I'm really excited. And that's why my body is responding the way it's responding. That's why I'm getting sweats. That's why I'm going red.
Your heart rate's
That's why my heart rate is going crazy, because I'm excited to go approach that person. I'm excited to go speak on stage, and no matter what happens, I know I'm going to learn something. I know it's going to elevate me to the next level. So I think that's really important. It's a good way to combat fear as well. Trick your brain into thinking that, no, you're actually you're excited rather than fearful about what's about to happen.
It's an incredible point. It's an incredible point. I love that. And it's the same. So I don't think it's cuckoo at all. Your mind and your body are inextricably linked. What you think will actually create emotion and a physiological response. And that's a feedback loop.
Yeah.
So if you're in a state of fear, then it'll make your mind release more cortisol and more fear hormone. And it's a cycle. But in that same way, you can hack it. So
cheers to that.
Cheers to that, bro.
Bro, I hack my brain all the time.
Let's make it happen. So if you, for example, when you're in a state of fear or excitement, your heart rate goes up, you breathe heavy or short, fast breaths, that kind of thing, you can reverse that. So if you intentionally take really deep breaths and slow it, that actually tricks your mind into going, oh, I'm calm. Because when you are calm and when you're in a relaxed state, that's how you breathe.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's that exactly the same way as what you said. It's another way to kind of hack your brain into doing that. So I think we can touch more about how to combat fear as we go on as well, but those are really good points.
Absolutely, yeah. And I guess it comes to, you can't combat something if you're not aware of it. Do you understand what I'm saying? So
That's a good one.
you have to be conscious about, and that comes from experience as well. If I'm not aware that I'm afraid of something, because I'm not exposing myself to whatever that is. A really silly example, but it's important. If I, for example, have a fear of approaching women and asking for their numbers, I don't know I have that fear because I'm not doing it. As in, it's kind of a made up fear in my head. I actually don't know. In my head, I'm telling myself that I'm fearful of approaching women to ask for their numbers. I don't know if that's true or not. If I'm not doing it, how the hell am I supposed to know if that's a fact or not?
Yeah, good point.
Until I actually do it. So once I've done it, depending on how I feel, will give me that answer. Well, does Nate actually get scared approaching women, or is it just in his head? And most of the time, it is in my head, because you do it, and even if you get rejected, your brain is like, yo, that actually wasn't as bad. Like, you didn't die, you didn't have a heart attack, you didn't have a stroke, nothing terrible happened. She just said no, and you went about your day, and
you feel good for actually doing it as well.
And life was good, and you feel good, you got a bit more confident. And so most of the time, you actually realize that through that action, that fear is just an illusion. Fear is an illusion. Fear is an illusion. Fear is an illusion. Tell that to yourself all the time. Now, what I talk about experience is, well, I might do that one time and get the response of no, and I might feel that fear. Like, oh, I got nervous, I got sweaty, whatever. The more I do it, the more I realize that I'm actually, like, I'm a G at this. Like, I've got no issues approaching, and then you start turning it into a joke. This is something I've done to combat fear as well, right? Where if I get rejected, depending on how many times I've done it, I'll start turning their response into a laughing matter. Okay. When you can laugh at something, and I think they talked about this, I swear they talked about this on Wednesday.
Yeah, they did actually.
Because I totally agree with this.
Yep.
Where if you are in a bad situation, or a situation where you get rejected, if you can just find humor in the bad things, trust me, it makes a big difference. And I've always tried to find humor in terrible things as well. And that sounds really weird, but if I get rejected, or if my car tire gets punctured, I will try and find humor in it. Yep. I'll be like, yeah, universe is messing with me. Yeah, you're messing with me, and it's all good. You know, I get back up. It's fine. So I always try to find humor in it. Yeah, I don't even know where I was going with that, but anyway, it's good.
It's good.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I love what we've all touched on.
Yeah. So let's finish off on this last topic, which is how fear prevents you from living up to your full potential. And I'm so passionate about this because 90% of people don't live up to their full potential because of fear. And so, I mean, I want you to kind of take us away with this, and then we might finish off with more ways to combat it. But I think, throughout the podcast anyway, we've been touching on different ways on how to combat fear. We can kind of put it all together. But what are your thoughts on fear and it preventing you from living a good life?
That'd be great. I think in a way, it might be the only thing that can prevent you, now that I'm thinking about it. Because situations that you're in, you can't always control that. But your potential is very different for each person. right? Your potential might be in a certain area that's different to what I want to succeed or excel in. And it's all about what you actually do with the cards that you're dealt. And I really think the only thing that can actually hold you back from that is the fear. And I wasn't thinking that before, literally, I just started talking now. But the more I'm thinking about it, those external results, they're not going to stop you. If you're really dedicated to making it happen, it's almost impossible they'll stop you if you just keep going. So really what will is, it's all you. It's your internal turmoil and the mindset you have, the thoughts you have around it. And a lot of that is fear. So I was already talking about this earlier with why you might be afraid of success. But fear lies at the end of your comfort zone. So something that's new that you want to do, you'll be afraid of that because it's unknown, you're not used to it, your identity doesn't align, whatever the case is. And the way to get out of that, I think, is to really push yourself and that exposure therapy. So to slowly get out of it. And in that way, you can little bit by little bit get 1% better at that skill overall yourself. And then you're able to kind of grow and improve in those areas to combat that fear and help try to achieve that full potential.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big one. And that goes back to that self-sabotage that we were talking about, being stuck in a unhappy, dysfunctional situation, such as that girl with no fear response, went back to her abuser, which is crazy, that type of concept there.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, when we talk about full potential, it's interesting because, like, we all fear that. I think that when I've seen this video where they ask people on their deathbed, what do you regret? What is one thing that you regret? And it's because I didn't buy the Porsche, I didn't buy that $1 million house, I didn't get an A+ in my maths class when I was in year 12. It's always that I cared so much about what people thought of me. I didn't live for me. I lived for other people.
Yeah, that's so big.
And you only live for other people because of fear. You do. Because you want to make sure that you're pleasing other people. You know, someone who doesn't fear anything is going to live for themselves and is going to be true to themselves. And they're going to be like, I don't care what anybody thinks. I don't care what anybody says about me, how they perceive me. I'm going to do what I got to do because it's about me and the life that I want to live. And so they'll take massive risks, no matter, and it doesn't matter who they piss off along the way. They'll take risks, they'll cut people off, they'll do all this stuff to live up to their full potential. And because they don't have that fear of trying to please people or what people might think of them. So
it's really powerful.
I think it's important that people understand, you know, at the end of the day, what are you going to say to yourself when you're on that deathbed? How are you going to review your however many years God gives you of life? Are you going to be, on a day-to-day basis, even ask yourself, you know, are you happy with how you live today? Like, did you go full out or did something prevent you from doing what you wanted to do? I can almost guarantee that if I was to reflect every couple of days, or even a weekly thing, let's make it a weekly thing, and you were to reflect on your week, there would be things that I did during the week that I would have regretted if I was to die tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like not talking to the girl who I thought was really pretty, not approaching someone because, you know, I thought like someone in a suit who I wanted to ask about what he did because I was curious, whatever it is, not stopping and giving someone the help that they need because in my head, everybody else is going to do it. So why would I do it? Someone else will help him. You know what I mean? Stuff like that it happens on a day-to-day basis. And if you can kind of reflect each week and be like, well, I did this, I've got to make sure that next week, if I'm put in those situations again, I've got to make sure that I react differently because it's the only way I'm going to get better. You know, so I think reflection is a big thing and understanding your behavior patterns.
Yep.
How many times are you in a situation where you behave in a particular way because of fear? And then reverse engineer that, you know, and figure out how to not allow that to happen over and over and over again. Yep. So, I mean, one of my, obviously it's a big fear for me to get to the end of my life and not having achieved everything that I want. And so you just have to be conscious of it and really take action on a day-to-day basis, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add? It's a loaded question, I'm not going to lie. I know I've been talking for ages, but it's loaded. Like, how fear prevents you from living your full potential. Like, it's loaded because there's social stuff, there's like career-based stuff, there's so many things. There's risk taking where you don't want to piss people off, like we mentioned. I'm just repeating myself now, but it's loaded. So I get it. I get why we can't really, word it in the way that we want to word it. But do you have thoughts on that?
I do. So I like what you touched on about reflecting and looking back on how you could have acted different in different situations. Because your potential, it is those really big things, those huge decisions and changes that'll get there. But it's also the tiny actions and decisions that compound into creating that identity you want, the results you want. So that little thing of maybe not buying an extra coffee when you didn't need, so your saving habits are in check. And then later on, that could lead to a lot of being in a very good financial situation, whether it be because you've saved or you then have extra money to invest or to do whatever it is. Or maybe talking to that one guy wouldn't have changed anything. But if you talk to 100 people and you find out what they do, maybe that could be the big thing that changes everything. So by getting over these fears, it's a way that you can do the tiny actions that compound over time. And those will actually lead to you fulfilling that potential because you've done all the little, or at least as many as you can, of the little directions and course corrections in the right place. And that'll lead there.
Absolutely. I guess one last thing I want to touch on is this concept of what if. And this has helped me a lot. Especially in social settings, what if it goes right? Like, you've got to rewire the brain to think along that path as well. What if it goes right? What if I go and approach this person and it goes well? What if I take that risk and it goes well? What if I start the business and I succeed? Because you're better off, and both, once again, we talked about the response of the brain. It's the same thing. What if it goes well? You're going to have the same physiological feeling as if it goes bad.
Yeah.
But one thing, when you get to the end of your life, if you take all those risks, you're not going to regret that.
Yep.
One thing is actually bettering your life, and the other is hindering you. Like, I can almost imagine, I can't even imagine the feeling that you would get sitting in your deathbed, laying there in your deathbed, and you didn't get to do everything you wanted to do. And it's like, time's up.
Yeah,
you had that chance, but you let fear prevent you from taking those risks. And I think that that's something that scares me a lot and propels me to actually want to take action at things that scare me.
Good.
Take action at things that scare you.
Yeah.
If it scares you, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, it's probably a sign that you should do it. But you got to be smart. Remember, like, don't go in the car with someone who's going to kidnap you. Don't do crazy stuff like that. You got to be smart. But if it's something that you know deep down is harmless, but you're just worried because you've got that anxiety, you can't control it, it's out of your depth, out of your comfort zone. 9 times out of 10, it's actually going to be good for you. And so you just have to take that leap of faith. It's all about that leap of faith and jump at it. Be like, I'm going to do it.
Yep.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Oh, I agree so much. And it goes, so with the people on their deathbed, right, they always say the fear or the effect of discipline and of faith, of doing it anyway, that's temporary. That only lasts for the time of you're uncomfortable doing it. But regret is forever.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't do it, you're going to be on your deathbed thinking about it, doing all that, and it's not going to be good.
That's so powerful. And I know that quote, and I want you to say it again, and I think we'll end with that. But that is so powerful. So say it again, and maybe reword it, because there's a quote.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact wording of it, but it's something like the effect of discipline and of taking that action anyway, that's temporary. That only exists for the discomfort of actually taking the action, the duration of that. Whereas the effect of regret is forever.
Yeah. So the pain of taking that action, the pain of that rejection is temporary. The pain of that, you taking that risk and failing, is temporary.
Right.
But the pain of regret that you didn't take that action, or that you didn't take that risk, or that you didn't take that job opportunity, that's forever.
Yeah.
And that's so true. And I think that, once again, it's all about perspective, and it's all about how you allow your brain to view things.
Yeah.
If you view it like that, then every time you're in that situation, you're going to be reminded, do I want temporary pain in maybe failing and, okay, cool, I failed, 1 step back, refine, 2 steps forward? Or do I want that pain of regret where I never took that leap of faith, I never took that opportunity, and I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. That's so powerful. And I think that if people sat down and really thought about it, everybody would rather take option one.
Yeah, right.
I'd rather feel uncomfortable for 10 seconds, 30 minutes, a day.
Nothing.
What's that? A day versus regretting it for years and years and years and years. So that's so true.
Yeah, and to add to that, there's this great quote that I like that kind of ties in with that concept, and it goes back to that leap of faith as well.
Yeah.
And it'll help you to be able to really trust in yourself and know that failure is just feedback. You'll be able to get better through it. Is they say birds are comfortable to sit on very thin branches, not because they trust that the branch will hold their weight, but their wings will catch them if they don't. And
That's
I think
cool. I like that.
which is really nice, right?
yeah.
So it's like that. You take that leap of faith, and even if you don't succeed, trust in your ability to bounce back and to learn from it, and to know that it can actually make you better, and then you can fly.
Absolutely. No, that's so powerful. All right, well, I think that's actually a good place to wrap up. It was nice and short. I think I love that topic, by the way.
Yeah, really good.
Honestly, we could come back in a month and touch on it again from a different perspective. I just wish that, for anyone who is watching and who's watched this long, just use this as a challenge to identify what in your life you are fearful of and how that fear is preventing you from living the absolute best life that you can be living, and just start taking those actions. I mean, we kind of mentioned different things throughout the podcast of what you can do to combat that.
Yep.
And it's all about action, action, action. And you said count down, yeah?
Count down from 5.
So don't count up, because you'll be like, what? All right.
101, 102.
Yeah, 5 in the morning. All right, I'll get up in 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Actually, that's so true.
Yeah.
If you're counting down 5, 4, 3, crap,
You reach one, you do it.
I got to get up, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, that was good, man. I appreciate you coming on again. You guys are going to see a lot more of this guy, so I'm looking forward to it.
Me too, man. Thanks for having me.
All good, man. Good stuff.